For 40 years, Margaret quietly built her life brick by brick, raising her son Robert alone, managing modestly, and saving in silence. Everyone believed she was just getting by, even Robert, especially Robert. So when he marched into her kitchen one rainy afternoon, demanding she sign over her house and move into a cheap nursing home, he thought he was being practical. What he didn't know was that Margaret had been preparing for that moment for years. What unfolded next wasn't just a battle over property. It was a reckoning, a clash of values between a mother who sacrificed everything and a son who thought love was entitlement. But Margaret didn't break. She stood firm, revealing a lifetime of hidden strength, financial, emotional, and moral. This is a story about dignity, about setting boundaries when love is twisted into leverage, about the quiet power of a woman who refused to be erased from her own home, her own story. It ends not with revenge, but with redemption, with hard-won understanding, and with the hope that sometimes the people we fear losing most are the ones who need our truth the most. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had to fight for your voice, this story is for you. Like, comment, and subscribe, because stories like these deserve to be heard. The rain came soft that morning, tapping gently against the kitchen window as I poured hot water over the chamomile flowers in my favorite blue porcelain teacup. The scent drifted up in warm, healing spirals, the same scent that had comforted me through sleepless nights after my husband passed, through late hours balancing the family budget, through the many winters I had quietly endured. My fingers ached, of course. Arthritis has a way of reminding you how many years your hands have carried, but I was still grateful for the peace in that quiet moment. I sat down at my usual place by the window, the chair with the floral cushion that Robert used to bounce in as a toddler, back when he thought everything in the world was magical and I could fix anything with a Band-Aid or a peanut butter sandwich. Outside, the 2 maple trees I planted when Robert was born swayed in the breeze, their once thin trunks now grown wide and sturdy, casting long shadows over the backyard. The tires on the wet gravel came next, sharp and too fast. Then a car door slammed, and then another. I didn't need to look. I already knew who it was. Robert never paid attention to my flower beds. His big silver BMW always parked too close, crunching the violets and scaring the birds. The way he knocked, 3 hard, impatient raps, spoke volumes about the mood he brought with him. "It's open," I called, my voice calm. I took a sip of tea to steel myself. The air felt thick with something, a storm not in the clouds, but inside my own walls. And then there he was, my son. Tall, handsome, always dressed like he was on the cover of some glossy business magazine. His wool coat was wet from the rain, but still pressed and expensive. Behind him stood Diane, his wife, clutching a designer umbrella like a scepter, her blonde hair in place like porcelain. "Mom," Robert said, not quite meeting my eyes. There was no kiss, no hug, no "how are you?" That part of our relationship had withered away like flowers never watered. "You're looking well," he offered. Hollow words. He might as well have been complimenting the kitchen tiles. I smiled anyway, because old habits are hard to break. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, already standing to fetch more cups. Diane shook her head, lips tight, gaze flicking over the house like she was assessing a real estate investment. Robert didn't sit. Instead, he dropped a thick manila envelope on the table with a deliberate thud. "We don't have much time, Mom," he said. "We need to talk." "Ah, so today was the day." He gestured toward the envelope. "It's about the house," he added, like it wasn't obvious. "And your future," Diane added sweetly, her voice soaked in the kind of fake kindness people use when trying to take something that isn't theirs. I didn't move. just sat there, holding my teacup. "What about the house?" "You're turning 70 next month," Robert said, as if that were news to me. "We think it's time to consider more practical arrangements." There it was, the thing he'd been circling for the past 3 years, my home, the place I'd lived in for nearly 4 decades. The house I built from broken pieces of my life after Edward died. The creaky stairs, the backyard where Robert took his first steps, the kitchen where I hosted every Thanksgiving dinner since 1985. That was what they came for. Diane reached out like she was going to pat my hand, but I lifted my teacup instead. She retracted her arm like she'd touched something sharp. "The stairs are too much. The yard is too big. It's not safe," she said. I looked at Robert. I had the handrails reinforced. Mrs. Brenner's grandson helps with the yard work. I manage just fine. "Mom," Robert said, his voice shifting into that condescending tone he used when explaining taxes to me, as if I hadn't worked for 30 years as a financial advisor. "This house is worth nearly $500,000. That could secure quality care for you for years." And where would I go?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He slid a brochure across the table, glossy, thick, filled with images of elderly people playing bingo. "Sunset Gardens," he said, "just outside the city. Very nice place. Medical staff, activities. They even have a dog therapy day every Thursday." "I have a dog named Winston," I said, not bothering to hide my sarcasm. "He visits every day and doesn't require me to sell my home." Robert didn't laugh. Diane gave a tight smile. "We brought the paperwork," she said, "just in case you're ready." My hands tightened on the cup. I remembered everything, every pipe I'd fixed with my own hands, every penny I'd scraped to repaint the walls, every night I'd spent on the floor when Robert had the flu and I was too afraid to leave his side. This house wasn't a structure. It was the memory of my struggle, my healing, my perseverance. And here was my son, the very person I'd sacrificed everything for, treating it like a line item on a spreadsheet. "I'll need time," I said finally. "You're not getting any younger," Robert said, the muscle in his jaw twitching the way his father's used to when frustrated. "This isn't a decision that can wait." "And I haven't lived 70 years making impulsive ones," I replied. He stood. So did Diane. "We'll give you a few days," he said, gathering the papers. "But the market's hot. We don't want to miss the window." I didn't speak. I watched them walk out. Diane paused by the china cabinet, her eyes lingering on my mother's antique tea set. "Beautiful," she said. "It is," I agreed. I promised it to Rebecca. Rebecca, my niece, my sister's daughter, the only one who called every Sunday without fail, the one who brought me cinnamon rolls on snowy mornings and remembered I liked my tea with a hint of honey. After they left, I sat alone in the quiet, the echo of their visit still heavy in the room. I finished my tea, now cold, and then I picked up the phone. First, I called Marcus, my lawyer, then Patricia, my financial advisor. The battle had begun, but what Robert didn't know, what he never cared to ask, was that I had been preparing for this moment since the Thanksgiving dinner 3 years ago, when I overheard him whisper to Diane that once they got the house, they'd gut the whole place and fast-track the Medicare paperwork. That day, I began planning, quietly, methodically, just as I had planned every other step of my life. They thought I was just an old woman. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The quiet fortress. That night, the rain slowed to a whisper, and I stood by the window long after the porch light flickered on, staring at the driveway where Robert's BMW had been. The muddy tire tracks left behind reminded me of the footprints he used to trail in from the sandbox as a boy, except now They felt like scars across the land I had nurtured. Once the house was quiet, and Winston, my old beagle, had curled up beside the fireplace, I opened the cabinet under the stairs. Tucked behind holiday ornaments and boxes of faded photos was a fireproof safe. I pulled out the key that hung from the chain I wore around my neck and unlocked it. Inside were the documents no one, not even Robert, had seen. I removed the thick envelope and laid it on the kitchen table, smoothing the pages out one by one. Deeds, pension statements, bank summaries. My 30 years at Hillcrest Financial had started in the mailroom. By the time I retired, I was leading retirement planning seminars for widows and teachers who'd spent decades caring for others. I knew how to grow wealth quietly, the kind that didn't show up in flashy clothes or European vacations, but in compound interest and blue-chip dividends. Robert never asked. He just assumed. He saw my old sedan, my modest furniture, my conservative wardrobe, and thought I was clinging to scraps. But modesty wasn't desperation. It was a choice, a strategy. I had built a quiet fortress, and now I intended to protect it. The next morning, Marcus met me at his office, the same office where he helped me revise my will 10 years ago when I had my first health scare, a small cardiac flutter that passed quickly but served as a sharp reminder that time is never on your side. He looked up as I entered, his tweed jacket slightly askew, glasses perched on the edge of his nose. "Margaret," he said, with a warm smile, standing to pull out a chair. "You're right on time." "I always am," I replied, settling in. "Let's get to work." Over the next 2 hours, we rewrote the blueprint of my financial life. The house was moved into an irrevocable trust with Rebecca as successor trustee. My accounts, retirement, investment, even the small rental property I owned in Mount Vernon, were shielded under layers of legal protections. Robert would not be able to touch a cent unless I allowed it. "Are you sure about this?" Marcus asked, glancing over his notes. "It will change everything between you two." I looked at him steadily. "Everything already changed. I'm just acknowledging it now." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. Afterward, I walked the 4 blocks to Meridian Financial, where Patricia greeted me with a hug and her usual no-nonsense charm. We had met in 1993 when she was a junior associate and I was trying to roll over a 401k. Over the years, we had both grown, her into a formidable investment strategist, me into a client with quiet millions in safe hands. "I want the restructuring," I told her. "All of it?" she asked, surprised. "All of it. The layered trusts, the staggered disbursements, the no direct access. I want it watertight." She nodded, pulling up files with practiced ease. "And Robert? Gets what I leave him, not what he assumes is his." As I signed the final forms, I felt the weight of years lift. Not the years of work or motherhood, those I carried with pride, but the years of silence, of hoping Robert would one day see me not as an obstacle, but as a person, a mother with her own dreams, sacrifices, and strength. When I returned home, the answering machine blinked with 3 messages from Robert. First, "Hey Mom, just checking if you've had a chance to look at the documents." Second, "We're trying to lock in a timeline with the realtor. Need your signature to move forward." Third, "Mom, this is getting frustrating. We're trying to help you. Don't make this difficult." I deleted all 3. Not out of anger, but clarity. His urgency wasn't about me. It was about the deal, the profit, the control. And that, I realized, was the difference between him and Rebecca. That evening, she called, as she always did. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice warm and steady. "I've taken care of it," I said. the teacup warm in my hand, the house, the finances, the protections. It's all done. I'm so proud of you, she said, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled from a place that felt real. The next day, I knew Robert would come. I didn't need a calendar. I could feel it in the air, the shift, the tension, like the deep stillness before a storm. Sure enough, his car appeared around noon. He didn't knock this time. He just walked in, uninvited, like he used to when he was 17 and needed money for gas. "You've been avoiding my calls," he said, not wasting time on pleasantries. "I've been busy," I replied evenly, "with my lawyer and my advisor." He blinked, thrown off. "Why?" "Because I needed to ensure that I, and everything I've built, would be protected." He scoffed. "From me?" I didn't answer. He walked to the table, dropped the envelope again, this time thinner, just the deed transfer. "Let's be adults about this. You're not going to live forever. The smart thing is to put the house in my name now, while you can still choose the terms." I stood, walked to the cabinet by the window, and returned with a single sheet of paper. Patricia's summary, neatly printed, crystal clear. Robert scanned the page. I watched his face change. "You're worth this much," he whispered. I nodded. He sat down heavily, as if the truth weighed more than he could bear. "You never said anything. You never asked." He looked at me, his face pale, sweat forming along his hairline. "I thought you were just getting by." "I know," I said softly. "That's what you wanted to believe." When silence becomes armor. Robert's fingers tightened around the paper as if willing the numbers to change. The silence in the room grew dense, brittle. "So all this time," he said slowly, "you've had all this money, and you let me think." I waited. Let him finish it himself. He didn't. "I let you think what you wanted," I said finally, "because you were never really listening." His mouth opened to protest, but the words didn't come, not right away. Instead, he shook his head as if clearing water from his ears, like a child who'd been dunked too fast in truth. "You let me worry. You let me believe you were one broken pipe away from a nursing home." "And yet," I replied, my voice steady, "you never asked how I was really doing." "Not once." He stood, pacing to the window, staring out into the garden where the daffodils had begun to bloom, early, shy signs of spring. "You think I'm the villain here," he said finally. "You think I don't care, that I'm just, what, a thief in a suit?" I stood too, more slowly, my joints stiff from years and wisdom. "I think you stopped seeing me as a mother a long time ago. I became a liability, a chess piece." He turned, a flush rising on his cheeks. "That's not true." I held up my hand. "It's okay if it is. I've had time to accept it. You grew up in a world that worships speed, image, gain. I raised you to be careful, but the world told you caution was cowardice, that humility was weakness." I took a breath, long and deliberate. "I don't blame you for chasing more. I blame you for assuming I had nothing worth protecting. I blame you for thinking I wouldn't fight back." Robert's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him like a balloon losing air. He looked older in that moment, not wiser, just tired. "What now?" he asked quietly. "You cut me out completely." I shook my head. "Number, I've protected what matters. But you're still my son. I haven't shut the door, but I'm no longer leaving it wide open for you to walk through with a briefcase and a plan." He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on a spot on the floor. "I need time," he said. "You've had time," I replied, not unkindly. "What you need now is change." He looked up. "And what do you need?" I smiled softly. "Peace. He didn't argue. That afternoon, he left without slamming a door, a small victory. For the next week, there were no calls, no emails, just quiet. I filled the days with walks around the garden, reading, tea with neighbors. Rebecca visited that Sunday with cinnamon scones and stories from her night shift. We laughed over tea and talked about orchids, and for the first time in months, I slept through the night, until Thursday, when I opened the mailbox. Tucked between flyers and bills was a handwritten envelope, no return address, just my name in Robert's familiar cursive. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Mom, you were right. I saw you as leverage, not legacy. I've enrolled in financial counseling, real counseling, not a seminar. I don't know how to earn your trust back, but I'm starting with honesty. Give me time. Or don't. I just wanted you to know I see it now, and I'm sorry. R. I read it 3 times, then folded it neatly and slid it into the drawer beneath my tea towels, the drawer where I kept things too important to toss, but too painful to display. I didn't reply. Not yet, because sometimes silence isn't cold. Sometimes silence is armor. A garden in winter. The wind had turned sharper by the end of that week, carving through the backyard with whispers that reminded me of old winters when Robert was small and used to leave footprints in the snow leading from the porch to the bird bath, his coat always unzipped, his hands never gloved. That boy, the one who used to ask if the birds got cold, who once gave up his allowance to buy a heating pad for a stray cat. I sometimes wondered where he'd gone. Was he buried beneath ambition? Or had he simply forgotten? On Sunday morning, Rebecca and I sat in the kitchen, sunlight splashing across the tiled floor like spilled gold. He wrote to you, she said gently, her tone cautious. I nodded. Are you going to write back? I don't know yet. She didn't push. She never did. Instead, she passed me a fresh slice of banana bread and poured more coffee. I keep thinking, she said after a while, about when we were little. Robert was always the golden boy. Big dreams. Big talk. He made it seem like you were holding him back, but looking back, it was never that simple. No, I agreed, sipping from my cup. It never is. I watched the light flicker across her face, so reminiscent of my sister's, and felt an unexpected warmth. Family wasn't just blood. Sometimes it was the one person who stood beside you when everything else collapsed. Later that day, I wandered the garden alone. The roses had long since withered, but the structure remained. Tangled branches twisting skyward, stubborn in their skeleton beauty. There was something sacred about a garden in winter. Nothing to prove, nothing left to impress. Just rest. Just quiet. I bent down beside a stone border I'd built myself 20 years ago and pulled up a few weeds that had slipped through the cracks. The soil was still firm, still mine. That evening, I opened my notebook, the one I used to plan Thanksgiving meals, organize repairs, track birthdays, and wrote Robert's name at the top of a fresh page. Then I listed, line by line, the boundaries I would no longer cross. I will not allow guilt to dictate generosity. I will not accept emotional manipulation masked as care. I will protect what I've built. I will choose peace over performance. I will answer kindness with kindness and deception with silence. I closed the notebook and exhaled. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about justice. It was about recentering myself after decades of emotional imbalance, the kind you don't realize you've carried until you finally put it down. The next day, I received another message from Robert. Would love to take you to lunch this week. No pitch, no proposal, just food, just us. I stared at it for a long time before replying. Friday, 12:30, the Garden Cafe? His response was almost immediate. Perfect! Thank you, Mom. I didn't reply. On Friday, I wore a soft wool coat, a gray scarf I'd knitted last winter, and the amethyst brooch Edward gave me on our 20th anniversary, the one Robert had once tried to pawn during his college years when rent came up short. I arrived early, always did. The garden cafe hadn't changed much, still smelled like rosemary and baked bread, still had the crooked table near the window where I liked to sit. They remembered me there, called me Miss Margaret, like it was still 1994. Robert walked in precisely at 12:30. No Diane, no briefcase, no sales pitch eyes. Just Robert, a little thinner, a little grayer, hands shoved in his coat pockets like a boy who didn't know where to place his guilt. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi." We ordered soup, salad, coffee, nothing fancy. For the first 10 minutes, we spoke about Rebecca, about the snow, about the birds returning to the feeder. Then silence settled, familiar and full. "Do you hate me?" he asked suddenly. I looked at him, really looked, and answered without hesitation. "Number. I'm disappointed. I'm hurt. But hate?" I shook my head. "I don't hate you," he nodded, eyes brimming. "I've started seeing a therapist, real sessions, not just some app." "That's good. I'm not asking for anything," he added quickly. I needed you to know I'm trying, not for the money, not for your forgiveness, for me." I believed him. For the first time in a long while, I believed him. And yet, trying doesn't undo damage. Trying doesn't erase the broken lines in the family portrait, but it sketches something new over the cracks, something maybe worth coloring in. When we parted, he didn't ask to come inside, didn't press for answers. He hugged me gently, like a son who remembered what that felt like. I stood on the porch and watched him walk away. No car engine roared, no gravel kicked up in frustration, just quiet steps down the path lined with violets he used to trample. That night, I wrote in my notebook again. He is learning, I am healing. Neither are guaranteed to last, but both are happening, and that's enough. For now. The letters we never sent. 3 days after the lunch at the garden cafe, I found myself sitting in the attic, not for cleaning, not for searching, but simply to remember. The old wooden ladder creaked the same way it had for decades, and the air up there still smelled like cedar and the faint trace of mothballs. I hadn't been up here in years. Dust sparkled in sunlight filtering through the narrow window. Boxes sat stacked in uneven towers like memories waiting to tip over. I didn't know exactly what had drawn me here, only that something in me had stirred. And then I found them. A shoebox, labeled in my own handwriting. Letters, unsents. Inside were dozens of yellowing envelopes, most never sealed, letters I had written over the years, but never mailed. Some were to Edward, written in the quiet hours after his funeral when I couldn't sleep and the world had gone numb. Others were to Robert, on birthdays when he hadn't called, on holidays when his absence was louder than the music, and some were to myself. I unfolded one, dated April 12th, 1989. Dear Robert, you're only 16, but you already talk like the world owes you something. I wish I could show you what it took to build what we have, how I've cut coupons and saved spare change and driven on bald tires just to give you the illusion of normal. I'm tired tonight, and maybe that's why I'm writing instead of lecturing. I just want you to understand one day that I gave you all I had, that I tried. Another, undated, but clearly written around the time of his wedding. I wore the blue dress you hated, the one you said made me look like a church lady, but it's the one your father liked, and today felt like a day I needed him beside me. Diane didn't include me in much of the planning. That's fine. She has her ways. You have yours. I brought a casserole to the rehearsal dinner and no one touched it. That's fine too. You looked handsome, happy. I smiled until my face hurt. I read until my eyes blurred, until the attic grew cold, until the ache of every unspoken word felt like it might swallow me. And then I made tea, because that's what women like me do when the heart breaks just a little more. We make tea, we bake, we call it a day and begin again the next. The next morning, I took a deep breath and decided to write a letter I would actually send. This one, not tucked in a box, not folded and hidden, but real. Dear Robert, there's something freeing about writing with no expectation, no demand for a reply, just truth passed from one pair of hands to another. I know you're trying. I see it. I believe it. But you need to know that trying doesn't erase history, that apologies, however sincere, don't undo the damage caused. What they can do, if nourished with time, action, and humility, is plant something new. A seed of trust, a root of change. That's where we are now. Not at forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps at the edge of something resembling understanding. I'm not asking you to be perfect. I never did, but I am asking you to be honest with yourself, with me, and with the people who love you despite all the mess you've made. You are not entitled to my home, my money, or my peace, but you are entitled to my hope, the fragile thread I continue to extend despite everything, that you can be better. So here's to fewer secrets, fewer performances, fewer orchids bought as apologies, and more truth. Love, Mom. I mailed the letter the next day. No fanfare, no registered mail, just a plain envelope dropped into the postbox beside the old bakery on Main Street. That afternoon, Rebecca returned with a fresh pie and a stack of library books. Heard from him, she asked, not looking up as she rolled out the crust. I sent him a letter. Her hands paused. A real one? I nodded. Yes, a real one. We didn't talk more about it. We didn't need to. That night, I walked the garden alone, flashlight in hand, checking the edges of the property before the snow came. The maple trees had dropped the last of their leaves. The air smelled clean, almost expectant. I paused by the bird bath where Robert used to leave breadcrumbs for the robins. He hadn't been that boy in a long time, but maybe, just maybe, some part of him still remembered. The silence between words. The first response came not in the form of a phone call or a long reply, but a single envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name, written in Robert's familiar handwriting. For a moment, my hands hesitated. Inside, a note, short, written in blue ink that smudged slightly at the edges. Mom, I've read your letter 3 times. I don't know what to say yet, but I hear you. I really do. Robert. No declarations, no promises, just acknowledgement, and oddly enough, that was more than I expected, and exactly what I needed. I placed his note next to mine on the hallway table. 2 notes like 2 breaths suspended in stillness. That Sunday, Rebecca arrived with a pot of soup and a stack of newspaper clippings. You're a local legend now, she teased, unfolding one of the articles. Anonymous donor supports 5 scholarships for single mothers returning to school. Rumor has it, she's a retired financial advisor with a sharp wit and a better memory than anyone else at the Rotary Club. I smiled, but said nothing. That donation had been a long time coming. I'd arranged it quietly through a trust in honor of Edward, and of every night I'd stayed awake worrying how I would raise a boy alone with a mortgage and $3.17 in the bank. Rebecca stirred the soup, then looked at me. Has he been in touch again? I shook my head. Not yet, but maybe silence is his version of honesty right now. She nodded, respectful of the space between us. Sometimes silence is what happens between the falling apart and the rebuilding. That night, I walked the hallway of my home, barefoot, touching the door frames, the window panes, the cool ceramic of the kitchen counter. Everything familiar, but somehow changed. My house was no longer just a sanctuary. It had become a fortress I had reclaimed, not with locks or lawyers, but with clarity. On the third Thursday of the month, my doorbell rang at 9 a.m. sharp. Robert. He stood on the porch, holding 2 paper bags, one labeled coffee, the other, surprisingly, tools. I figured we could fix that loose gate hinge in the back, he said, not waiting for an answer, just walking past me into the kitchen like he used to as a teenager. I followed slowly, unsure of what this visit meant. Peace offering, guilt, habit. He unpacked the coffee without speaking, poured mine first. 2 sugars, no cream. I looked at him. You remembered? He nodded. I forget a lot of things, but not that. We sat at the kitchen table in silence for a while, the smell of coffee mixed with old wood, rain, and something that might have been nostalgia. I'm not good at letters, he said finally, or apologies, or anything that requires admitting I was wrong. I didn't interrupt, didn't fill the silence with forgiveness or platitudes. I've started paying the restitution, he continued. 1 month in, I've even stopped resenting it. He smiled, and for the first time in years, it didn't feel forced. Do you want to see the orchid room? I asked after a pause. He blinked. You still have it? I nodded. We walked to the sunroom together. The orchids, now blooming under soft lamps and filtered sunlight, swayed gently. I used to hate this room, he confessed, hands in his pockets. Thought it was a waste of space, just plants and silence. But now, he trailed off. But now, I prompted. He shook his head slowly. It feels like peace. Later, while he adjusted the gate in the backyard, I stood at the kitchen sink, watching through the window. His movements weren't as confident as they used to be. He paused more often, measured twice, checked the screws, wiped sweat from his brow even though it was barely 60 degrees. He was trying, not just to fix the gate, but to fix something far older and far more fragile. When he finished, he knocked twice on the window with a sheepish grin, holding up the loose hinge like a trophy. That evening, after he left, I sat down to write another letter. Not for him, not for anyone else, just for me. Dear self, you survived the silence, the betrayal, the storms, both literal and metaphorical, and somehow you're still standing, surrounded by orchids, light, and the sound of wind in the maple trees. You did not fold. You did not sign. You did not disappear. You held the line. And now there is space for something else. Not reconciliation, not yet. But truth, and that's a start, between orchids and ashes. It started with an invitation I almost didn't open, a card in a pale blue envelope, with handwriting I didn't recognize. You are cordially invited to the retirement party of Mr. Gerald Whitaker, principal of Fairview High School for 38 years. In smaller script at the bottom, your presence would mean the world to him and to his son, Robert Whitaker. Robert. I hadn't heard his last name spoken aloud in years. He rarely used it anymore, had long ago dropped the Whitaker from his business cards, his LinkedIn profile, even his voicemail greeting. I had assumed it was pride or embarrassment. But now, it felt like something else, like a thread he was trying to sew back into his life. When he stopped by that week with a fresh bag of groceries and a new batch of his accountant's pay stubs, proof of his ongoing commitment to the repayment plan, I mentioned the card. I wasn't sure you'd go, he admitted. Neither was I replied, folding the invitation back into its envelope. Dad asked about you, he said, after a pause. I told him I've been seeing you again. Gerald and I hadn't spoken in over 20 years. Our split had been quiet, clean, no drama, just two people who had grown apart after raising a child under the weight of grief, bills, and different dreams. But he had always loved Robert, and Robert, well, he was finally learning to love us back, in his own way. So I went. The retirement party was held at the Old Town Library, newly renovated, with strings of twinkle lights stretched across the main hall, and a live jazz trio playing softly in the corner. I wore the navy dress I had bought for Rebecca's graduation, simple, elegant, paired with a brooch Edward once gave me. Robert met me at the door, nervously adjusting his collar. "You look beautiful," he said, and this time I believed he meant it. He offered me his arm like a prom escort, walking slowly through the crowd of well-wishers and former students. Faces blurred into years, people who had once been teenagers in my kitchen, now teachers, nurses, parents. Near the refreshments table, Gerald stood, holding court, with a glass of lemonade and a proud smile that hadn't changed in decades. When he saw me, the smile faltered, not from discomfort, but emotion. "Margaret," he said simply. "Gerald," I replied, not cold, not warm, just real. There was a long pause before he stepped forward and hugged me. It was the kind of hug that says nothing and everything. "You raised a stubborn one," he said after we pulled apart. "I wonder where he got it," I murmured. And we both laughed, not at each other, but with the shared memory of who we used to be. Later, after the speeches and the cake, I found Robert standing outside in the cool night air, his tie loosened, hands in his pockets. "Thanks for coming," he said. "Thank you for inviting me," I replied. He looked up at the stars, then down at the gravel path. "I've been thinking," he said, "about your idea, the scholarship fund. I'd like to help." I raised an eyebrow. "I don't mean manage it," he clarified quickly. "I mean volunteer, do the books, meet the students, maybe tell my story. I know I'm not exactly a role model, but maybe you could be," I finished for him. He nodded. "I've made a mess of a lot of things, Mom, but I want to spend the rest of my life cleaning up, not just my finances, but everything." A breeze picked up. The maple trees rustled like old secrets. "You're on your way," I said softly, "but the path isn't paved with apologies." He looked at me, his eyes honest and tired. "I know. It's paved with actions." And for once, he didn't ask for praise or permission. He just offered his arm again, and we walked back into the hall together. A garden in winter. The first snowfall of the season arrived quietly. I watched from my kitchen window as the flakes drifted down, settling on the dormant flower beds and hedges like a quilt gently laid across the earth. The wind was calm, the sky a muted pewter, and the air held that sharp electric silence that only comes with snow. I had just finished my morning tea when a soft knock came at the door. Not the knock of a stranger, not the impatient rap of someone with demands, just soft, hesitant, familiar. It was Robert. He wore the same wool coat I'd seen at the retirement party, a little more worn now, and carried a large cardboard box in both arms. "What's all this?" I asked as I opened the door. He smiled, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes, but tries. "I thought it was time I returned these," he said, stepping inside. I closed the door behind him and followed as he carried the box to the living room. He placed it carefully on the floor, then crouched beside it, flipping back the top flaps like a man unearthing something sacred. Inside were photo albums, old school drawings, a cracked snow globe, my late husband Edward's watch still ticking faintly beneath the velvet lining of its case. "These were in the storage unit," Robert said. "The one I forgot we even had. I thought they were mine to keep, but now—" He trailed off. Now, he knew better. I sat down slowly beside the box, lifting a photo from the top. It was one I hadn't seen in years. Robert at age 5, in a cowboy hat, holding a garden hose like a lasso. "I remember this day," I said, the memory rising like steam. "You soaked the neighbor's cat." Robert chuckled softly. "You made me write an apology note and deliver it with a tin of cookies." "You hated raisins," I added, "but you ate 3 of them just to prove a point." He shook his head. "You always remembered the little things." Silence stretched between us, soft and full. Then Robert said something I never expected. "Mom, do you think I could move back in for a little while?" The question sat heavy in the air. He rushed to explain. "Not to stay permanently, just temporarily. The apartment lease is up next month, and I'm still catching up with repayments. I've been sleeping on a friend's sofa, and it's not ideal, but only if you're okay with it." I looked at him, really looked at him. There was no entitlement in his voice, no expectation, just a weary hope. I reached for another photo, Robert, age 10, holding up a science fair ribbon with crooked teeth and grass stains on his knees. That boy had become this man, flawed, tired, humbled. I didn't answer right away. I stood, walked to the kitchen, and returned with a folded towel and a pillow from the guest room. I handed them to him without a word. His eyes filled, not with pride, but relief. "Thank you," he whispered. That winter, my house changed. It wasn't sudden or dramatic, just the quiet return of 2 lives learning how to share space again. Robert kept to the guest room. He cooked dinner twice a week, did the dishes without being asked, and even joined me in the garden shed to fix the broken latch on the greenhouse. Some nights, we watched old films. Other nights, we said nothing, simply sat in companionable silence while the fireplace crackled and the clock ticked softly behind us. He never brought up the money again. And neither did I, because something deeper was being restored. Trust. Slowly. Delicately. Like frost melting from glass. A legacy of stillness. Spring returned slowly, hesitantly, as if unsure whether it was welcome after such a long, quiet winter. In the mornings, I would often find Robert already in the garden, kneeling beside the tulip beds, his breath visible in the cool dawn. He had taken to watering the flowers, pruning the hedges, and even speaking to the soil like someone learning the language of patience. One Saturday, I brought him a cup of tea. He took it without a word, his gloved hands wrapped around the warmth. "Mom," he said after a long pause, "do you ever regret not doing more with your money? Traveling, buying something extravagant, living large?" I looked out over the budding garden, the same one I had planted in grief and grown in silence. "No," I said. "I regret not listening to music louder in the house when no one was around. I regret not dancing barefoot more often. But no, not the money. That was never the point." He nodded slowly. "I think I'm starting to understand that." That moment, not the words, but the pause between them, felt like healing. Not a complete fix, not erasure, but acknowledgement. He remained in my home for 3 more months. During that time, he paid off his first major repayment, received a formal commendation at his nonprofit job, and began speaking at recovery programs about accountability and financial abuse. I never asked to attend. One day, he invited me. I sat in the back of the modest community hall, anonymous among strangers, listening to my son speak, He didn't mention me by name, but he didn't have to. And I learned, he said, voice steady, that sometimes we don't realize the damage we cause until someone refuses to be broken by it. My mother did that for me. She stopped me, even when it hurt her, especially when it hurt her. The room was quiet. Then came the applause, not thunderous, but sincere. And in that quiet strength, I finally saw what all my years of silence had grown. On my 71st birthday, Robert gave me a gift wrapped in butcher paper and twine. Inside was a hand-carved wooden box. He'd made it himself in an evening class he'd been taking at the local community center. Inside the box, tucked in velvet, was the same snow globe from his childhood, this time repaired. The glass dome had been replaced, the base refinished. When I shook it, tiny flakes danced around a miniature maple tree. I cried, not because of the globe, but because he had finally seen what mattered. Not money, not legacy, but repair, care, effort. I know I can't change the past, he said, voice rough, but I want to live the rest of my life in a way that honors what you gave me. I touched his cheek, something I hadn't done since he was a boy. That's all I ever wanted. Robert eventually moved out, not in anger, not in shame, but with dignity. He bought a small home, a fixer-upper, he told me proudly, and invited me over for dinner 3 weeks later. The kitchen needed new cabinets, the floor creaked, the wallpaper peeled in the corners. It was perfect. Still needs work, he said, grinning. Don't we all, I replied. The orchids he once sent still sit in my sunroom. Some petals are gone now, but the stem still blooms. Rebecca visits often. She and Robert have grown close again, bonded not by shared history, but by honesty. When she passed her board exams, she brought me a bouquet and told me, "You're the reason I believed I could keep going." I had spent so many years afraid of confrontation, afraid of breaking what little I had left of my family. But sometimes the only way to build something new is to break what was never whole to begin with. Now, in the evenings, I sit by the same window. The maple tree in the backyard, the one I planted when Robert was born, is taller than the house. Its branches stretch in every direction, strong and imperfect. Like my son. Like me. If you've come this far, thank you. This story wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about wealth. It was about love that chooses boundaries over silence, dignity over sacrifice, and hope, not blind, but clear-eyed, that people can change when they are finally told the truth. So if this story moved you, if it reminded you of your own mother, your own son, your own strength, please leave a comment. Share your thoughts, and don't forget to like and subscribe, because tomorrow I have another story for you, and it might just be the one your heart's been waiting for.